This is Beneficence, a statue in the midst of the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Benny, as her friends call her, extends her right hand, welcoming everyone to campus. In her left hand, she holds all the treasures of higher education. This magnificent sculpture is the last commissioned work of Daniel Chester French, who is best known as the sculptor of the seated Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Hi, I'm Blaine Brownell, president of Ball State University. Today we announce another chapter in the historic partnership between Insight Distance Learning, the Indiana Academy, Ball State University, Teachers College, and the Best Buy Corporation. Through this partnership, we are able to pull together these resources of advanced technology and personal learning to broadcast a series of 3 live electronic field trips. These field trips open the doors of learning by bringing the nation's treasures to thousands of classrooms across the country. These field trips coincide with the grand opening of the first 15 of 40 new Best Buy retail stores in New York City. The Minneapolis-based Best Buy Corporation is known as a leader in specialty retail of consumer electronics, personal computers, entertainment software, and appliances. Beginning in September, we'll take you to the beaches of Melbourne, Florida, along with Smithsonian scientists from the National Museum of Natural History, to watch as sea turtles return from the ocean to continue the process of creating their next generation. We'll go next to the museum in Arlington, Virginia, where students can explore the often contentious yet interdependent relationship between politicians and the media. In December, prepare to take off for the National Air and Space Museum for an in-depth look at how planes fly and the concepts that make unique aircraft defeat the laws of gravity through the laws of physics. This isn't the first time that Best Buy has brought the world of learning into classrooms using advanced technology through Insight Distance Learning. Last year, the Best Buy Children's Foundation took us on a tour of the Origins of Being Human exhibit. They transported students to a dinosaur dig in Colorado and Utah to discover the science of digging up bones, and they helped explore the creatures and environmental chemistry of life underground. If all this isn't enough excitement for you, how about a trip around the world? In the spring of 2001, Insight Distance Learning at Ball State will begin a 4-part series on African Voices, a phenomenal exhibit at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. The series will begin in February with A Struggle for Freedom, a live broadcast from the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. Then in May, take a trip with us to the African continent and learn about the vast and rich varieties of African history and culture. The final 2 parts of the series will air in the 2001-2002 academic year. Through this partnership, we encourage everyone to turn on the fun through the use of technology. We're delighted to bring these field trips into the classroom, business, and home of all who wish to explore people, places, science, and culture worldwide. For all of us at Ball State University, I'm Blaine Brownell.
I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. I hope he would grant me the same. The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
You have totally misunderstood the purpose of this program's discussion of the package.
What is it?
The purpose is to analyze what the court campaign...
You know, usually for other people on other subjects, there's some reasonable standard of proof.
Yes, I was Bill Clinton's lover for 12 years.
Well, we all make mistakes. I've been known to mangle a syllable or 2 myself, you know. But, you know what I mean.
One of the reasons I regret it is that getting detail wrong interfered several times with the point that I was trying to make.
I want to thank you all for listening. I'm running to get some things done for America. There's too many issues left unresolved. There's been too much finger-pointing and too much name-calling in Washington, D.C.
This race is about values, it's about change, it's about giving choices to the American people.
Will you help me now become the next president? President of the United States, officially.
Welcome to the museum in Arlington, Virginia. We're so glad that you all could join us here today. We have an exciting event for you, a great electronic field trip all about presidential campaigns. The museum is the first and the only interactive museum of news. It's a place where you come to go behind the scenes and see how and why museum is news is made. So we want to welcome you here for this exciting trip behind the scenes about presidential campaigns. I'm Sissy Anklin, the curator here at the museum, and with me are two of my teammates who are going to help you take this field trip today. We've got Kate and Roussard. And so when we are ready to rock and roll on this exciting field trip, first, a couple of things and thank yous that we want to make. It's special thanks to Best Buy Foundation for supporting this electronic field trip and making it possible. Also, the Freedom Forum Foundation, which funds the museum, its largest program, is a nonpartisan international organization that is dedicated to free speech, free press, and free spirit. Now, let's go on and we'll introduce the rest of our team members in just a minute, because we're going to bounce you back and forth a lot here today and meet the different team members. But first, let me tell you, we need you to help make this thing really exciting. So I'm here to encourage you to make this a wonderful interactive field trip, which means you've got to call in. You've got to ask a lot of questions. So we're counting on you. And on the screen now you can see the numbers to call in at. You can call in on the 1-800 number. We've also got an internet connection or an email that you can write to us on, but we need lots of questions and lots of answers. I mean, we'll give you lots of answers. You can give us answers too, though. So we're going to get ready to go now. And to begin our field trip, we're going to begin at the very beginning. What a good idea, huh? So we're going to start with the quote, which is behind me on the wall here and my teammates, but it's also on your screen. And it's a quote written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, who is an author and a historian who helped us work on this exhibition. And I think when we were struggling with what did this need to be about and what stories did we want to tell, she came up with a terrific quote right here that sort of sums up what we're going to do here today. Now, that's given you enough time to read that quote, and you can tell it's really about the battle lines that are drawn between the press and the candidates every 4 years as each tries to get their message out. So why don't you all tell our folks, you've been working on this a long time, tell them what you're up to today.
Well, for the last few weeks, we've been thoroughly investigating 4 different forms of media, print, internet, television, and radio. We found some really interesting differences, and we're happy to share them with you today.
This project was a great learning experience. What we observed was unique, and it was a great learning experience. And not many people are used to following a certain event through only one media. And since it was a great experience, and that's what we will share with you.
Great. Now we're going to meet the rest of our teams. I told you we'd be bouncing back and forth a lot. So here we go. First is Bill Nichols, who is now the State Department correspondent for USA Today. He's also covered a couple of political campaigns and has covered the White House. To you, Bill.
Thanks, Sissy. We want to thank you all for joining us here today. And we're here with students from Annandale High School and also the Indiana Academy in Muncie, Indiana. Trying to figure out which camera switch here. I'm a print guy, so you'll have to excuse me. But I am, as Sissy said, I cover the State Department for USA Today, and prior to that I covered the White House for about 7 years during the Clinton years, and I think I've covered now 4 presidential campaigns in one form or another. So I've had access to at least 3 of the mediums that these students have been studying in depth, and am trying, like most people my age, to learn enough about the internet to be able to keep up with these guys who know a lot more about it than I do. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about each of those medias, taking some questions from me, but we'll have a lot better program if we get, as Sissy said, some questions from you. So with that, we'll go up to, as Sissy said, we're going to have a number of locations here. So we'll go up to our 3rd location, and up to you, Sissy.
All righty.
I think Bill is Gene Policinski.
Okay, I'm here to...
I'm on the overlook with my colleagues here who are educators, and
All right, I'm going to introduce you to our next team, which will be our wrap-up team. That will be led by Gene Policinski from the First Amendment Center. Gene?
Thank you, Sissy. My name is Gene Policinski. I've been a correspondent on Capitol Hill. I covered the White House. I've also was the Washington editor of USA Today when it started, and I'm joined today by my colleagues here who are teachers. We're on the overlook of the museum technically, but I think we're going to dub this Teacher Central. And our task today is going to be to provide some background. We're going to be taking a look at what goes on behind the scenes today, as well as what went on to get us to this point. And to start that process and to allow them to introduce themselves, let me turn first to Ken.
I'm Mr. Ken Stewart from the Indian Academy, and I teach social studies.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Burns, and I teach government and politics at Annandale High School in Virginia.
I'm Alan Weintraut, and I teach journalism at Annandale, Virginia.
Hi, I'm Lee Esterlid, and I teach history at the Indiana Academy. So what's going to happen over the next hour is that we're going to have a program intended to make you a more informed and thoughtful political consumer. What's been going on for the better part of a month right now is that we've had 12 students from the Indiana Academy in Muncie, Indiana, and 12 students from Annandale High School in Northern Virginia who have been tracking the presidential campaign through 4 specific media outlets. The first being print media, the second, radio, the third, broadcast television, and the fourth, the internet, or the World Wide Web. Every day they have surveyed their specific media in order to gain a better understanding of how they, and therefore you, view the presidential campaign. Right now in the studio there are 4 sets of students, 2 students from the Indiana Academy and 2 students from Annandale each, who are going to now relate how that perception of the media, that one media, has affected the way they see things. But there's also going to be some things going on up in the exhibit, but Alan will explain that to you.
That's right. We want to take advantage of the exhibit that we have here today and compare and contrast what we've done with this presidential campaign and presidential campaigns in the past. So, for example, when our students are talking about what happened on television this year, we will look back to the famed Nixon checker speech from 1952.
Okay. Well, I think we'll be talking a lot about how all this project came together. We'll also be interested, I believe, as we've said a little earlier, with the 800 number and the internet address and hearing what you have to say. And we'll be going back to Bill Nichols now in the Newseum television studio.
Thanks, Gene. We're back here in the studio with our students who are going to be sharing with us what they've learned in the last 3 weeks. And print, as the previous panel said, is where we're going to start today. My favorite medium as a print person of 20 years now. And we're now going to look at some examples of some of the headlines and front pages that our students have looked at. Here's the Boston Globe with a central image from the most recent Bush-Gore debate. The debates have sort of dominated what they've been looking at during their period of study. So let's get to the questions. Just in general, why don't you all tell me what you think the strengths of the print medium are and what the weaknesses are in the most general terms that you want to use.
Well, I think one of the strengths is that it presents a more unbiased view in some ways. I think that I didn't actually see the debates, so I missed a lot of the things that apparently distracted people. I didn't see Al Gore sighing, I didn't see Bush winking to anyone, so I missed all that, and I think I was able to get down to the issues.
Okay.
My favorite strength about the paper, I think, was the in-depth look you could get where you can't really get from TV and things like that. But you could get a lot of issues and a wide array of things that you could focus on through the newspaper.
In contrast to what Kate said, I felt it was difficult to get to know the candidates on a personal level, and I kind of would like to have seen the debates to see how the candidates interacted and not just have read about it through journalists.
I thought a great strength was that every story was compacted into a very readable story, as opposed to you'd have to sit through the entire debate and listen to all the things, and it takes a great amount of time. Whereas you can sit down with the newspaper at any time and catch up on all the news that's happened.
Okay. Kate brought up bias. Let's talk a little bit more about that and talk about some examples that you may have found in which you felt that print organizations were favoring one candidate or another.
Well, I think first we need to discuss the kinds of bias that are present. It's sometimes bias can be presented in word choice. Other times it can be presented in space. I think we all noticed in our articles that sometimes papers seem to lean. I know in Indiana and Virginia, we're both conservative states. What did all you recognize with that?
I definitely saw a lot of the verb choices I thought would be biased.
What's an example of that?
Bush overtakes Gore, things like that, or just sort of a little strong than a biased newspaper might, have put in.
I saw a lot of the large city papers like the New York Times I looked at, the Washington Post. Those two especially, I noticed, are very liberal leaning, and most of the opinion pages at least are dominated by pro-Gore stories.
Okay.
I think one type that we actually didn't touch on though was the actual story selection. A conservative paper might cover something negative about Gore, while a liberal paper might not even cover that at all or give it secondary treatment. And I thought that might be actually the most prevalent form of bias that I saw.
And did you tend to find that the smaller papers you were looking at, like your local papers, had more or less bias than the national publications you were looking at, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, or USA Today?
Well, I think a great difference was that in the local papers we didn't find as much coverage at all on the election. Sometimes there would be one story, and if it was about one candidate, that was the only candidate you'd hear about. That was in my local city paper. But then when I pick up the New York Times, there'd be an entire section on the election, so it's really difficult to say.
All right, and you all looked at more than just newspapers, so let's talk a little bit about news magazines, what you found there, how they compared with newspapers, either in terms of just general content or bias or any other observations that you might have.
I really enjoyed the news magazines. They gave me a really different perspective because it wasn't covering just what had happened that day, but more what had happened that week, and you could get a very nice overall view of what was going on, and it was compacted, it was very nice, it was a summary.
I think a great feature in the news magazines was that they did a lot of feature stuff, a lot of human interest. They'd count how many times a candidate blinked, or how many times he made reference to the wealthiest 1% or fuzzy math, and I thought that was it was a really great tool in getting to know the candidates.
And how different, one final question, how different an experience was this for you to just rely on print? I mean, is this a medium that you all use regularly in your regular lives?
I think that most of us try to, but it's really hard not to just flip on the television, see a 5-minute segment, and get the news for the day. I think that print has its advantages, but one of the drawbacks is the amount of time that it takes.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now send it back up to Sissy for further on print.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. Here we are finally in the exhibit now, and we're at the very first part of the exhibit, which is 1896, and it's McKinley's front porch. What a different way to campaign. In 1896 is the birth, really, of modern campaigning. But it puts in context this whole story of presidential campaigns, because what we do is we start you on McKinley's front porch, where the public and the press had to come to the candidate and meet him on his own turf, right here in Canton, Ohio, and ask their questions there, and then put their reports in, and it went into the print that way. The reason we say it's the birth of modern campaigning is William Jennings Bryan had to get around that method because McKinley was so popular and so good at the front porch speech that he began to travel around the country. But I've got some other kids who've done a lot of research on this, and you need to really hear from them. So come on in. So tell folks what you found out about this whole print section in here.
Well, as Sissy said, the election of 1896 was really the birth of modern campaigning between McKinley and Bryan. And McKinley, 750,000 people came to his front porch just to hear him speak and just tell the nation what he had to offer them as president. Whereas Bryan knew he was the underdog in this campaign, and he decided to go to the people rather than have the people come to him. And he went out around the country, and McKinley saw this, and to counter that, he got a campaign manager. And this man, Mark Hanna, was the first campaign manager in the history of campaigns. And this is where modern print and press really came out, because Hanna invented the propaganda. He started putting propaganda against Bryan, and he started putting ads in the paper for McKinley. And by doing that, he gave the press the story. And that's how print really emerged, that the candidates and their campaign managers would give the press something to put in the paper. And that is how McKinley came over Bryan to win the election.
The other thing we noticed is during this time there's a lot of what we call the party papers, and the difference with that is the newspapers we have today show both sides of the story and try to be objective as possible. However, these papers would pick a candidate and give the biased view and the only things that would make them look good, their particular candidate. But at this time, the public started moving towards wanting more objective information and having both sides of the stories, and newspapers had to respond to this to improve their circulation. Because of this, the candidates could no longer control what the press would say because the press wasn't always on their side, so they had to control what the press got. For instance, with Coolidge and the photo op process, which started around the same time. The idea of a photo op, which would be a picture planned by a public relations types manager to make the candidate appear in a certain light. And this was because we couldn't control what the press would do. Press conferences with pre-done questions, pre-set up photographs became commonplace, and that took the campaign manager and the personal relations manager and put them into modern campaigning. Edward Bernays was a tobacco advertiser, and he was hired to make Coolidge look more relaxed, more a man to the people, because he was kind of seen as stiff and not so cool. So
That's right. That's a really good point. You guys have done a lot of good work. Back to Mark Hanna for 1 minute. One of my favorite quotes from Mark Hanna was, he said, "There's two things about politics. The first one is money. The second one, I don't remember." And that's still true. So see, some things stay the same. Money is still a crucial issue. Also on Coolidge, it was really fun. One of the famous quotes about Coolidge was that he looked so sour he was weaned on a pickle, which I think is a pretty good sum up of Coolidge. But they did finally get him to laugh. And Edward Bernays did that, and he was famous for tobacco advertising. He's actually the guy who figured out to get women to start smoking. He had debutantes walking around smoking cigarettes. And then he took Coolidge and actually got Coolidge to smile, so it was a big moment.
we also found this was kind of noticeable in the way that candidates are set up today. Like, for instance, Al Gore, which some people might perceive as kind of a Coolidge type figure. Sometimes the public relations managers and the campaign managers see these opportunities and try to take advantage of them to make a candidate appear a certain way.
Many pictures were taken of Gore with his wife. So when you opened up the paper and took a look at the picture, you'd see the candidate in the light of, well, they're a great family man. They must have high morals. Look at the way they interact with people. And that can, a picture really is worth 1,000 words. And that can really sway someone who's not supportive of any of the candidates to maybe vote for Gore or vote for Bush or whoever else may be running.
Well, now I think as we leave the print area, let's go and talk about one of the most famous print stories of all. Can the two of you tell us about Dewey beating Truman? Anything sound funny in that?
Well, the case in that situation was there's election versus Truman and Dewey. And because the journalists had polled people, they had assumed that Dewey had won. But this was also introduction of modern polling, because instead of polling random people on the street, the introduction of a focus group, a group of people who represented all of America, or like a slice of the population, who could give an accurate opinion instead of something that was a little more skewed. So when they incorrectly picked the candidate, it cost them millions of dollars to reprint all of it.
That's right. Very good. I think what we're going to do now is kick it back to Gene and wrap up this segment on print. Back to you, Gene.
Thank you, Sissy. Welcome back to the Museum Overlook. There's a little housekeeping chore to start off with. We'd like to remind you that when we show the 800 number and the internet address there, we'd like you to call in or log in and give us your vote for president. We'll show the candidates, and we'd like to have you do that. So if you could, please call that number that's on your screen and give us your selection for the candidates. We're joined again on the Overlook by Alan Weintraub from Annandale High School and Ken Stewart from the Indiana Academy. And our role today is to sort of look at each of these segments and to talk for a bit about what we've heard. And what have we heard, Ken?
Well, I think the students from both Annandale and Indiana Academy have done a good job of analyzing through the print process what they believe are strengths of the media's coverage and perhaps what are some of the weaknesses of the coverage, and what they're examining in terms of bias, in terms of content, in terms of coverage with print and also cartoons and so forth.
Covering a wide span here, print is the oldest medium that we're going to be taking a look at.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that print is still a viable source of information for the campaign. It's all a matter of, do you have time to sit down and read the stories? And I was glad to hear that the students were able to detect some of the biases that are still present in the media today.
Well, one of the things as a former print reporter, I worked very hard to avoid that kind of situation, to keep it neutral. Do you think what we're hearing today says that that's just not possible?
Well, I think it's possible. There was an interesting article in the Washington Post yesterday about the natter name-outs for positivism. That seemed like a research done that 65% of the print media is really doing positive things to cover the campaign. So it's interesting how the students are responding to that process.
What do you think? Do you think it's possible to have an objective print report?
I think it is. Our students in our part of the exhibit showed us in history that we didn't even try to be objective. At least today we do try to be objective. Sometimes it always doesn't work out, but well, for the most part it does, I think.
Very good. Well, we'd like you again to call in and let us know your selection for president if you do that, or log in and give us your vote over the internet, and we'll give you a phone number and display the candidates, and we hope that you'll be doing that. We'll be taking a look at each of the mediums as we come back over here to Teacher Central. But now I think we need to go to Bill Nichols down in the studio.
Thank you, Gene. We're back here in the studio with our students, and we're going to talk about radio, which I think we would all agree is one of the most creative mediums that we're going to be looking at today. And as someone who's worked with tremendously talented radio people for a long time, I've always envied what they're able to do just with words alone and without the added addition of photographs or graphics that both us in the print medium and our cousins in television and the internet get to use. So we've got a brief audio clip that we want to play for you to give you a sense of what the students have been listening to. It's from National Public Radio, featuring their White House correspondent, Mara Liasson, and one of their senior commentators, Dan Shore, if we've got that for our audience to hear.
On the one hand, it made it look like Bush was evasive, but on the other hand, Gore had to look really pushy to make that point.
Yeah, but I think he was willing to be pushy. I think he's tried once being pushy and they didn't like it. Then he tried once being not pushy. That didn't work well at all. So I think he's gone back to being his real pushy self.
On the one hand, it made it look like Bush was evasive, but on the other hand, Gore had to look really pushy to make that point.
Yeah, but I think he was willing to be pushy. I think he's tried once being pushy and they didn't like it. Then he tried once being not pushy. That didn't work well at all. So I think he's gone back to being his real pushy self.
We're back in the studio. That was Dan and Mara arguing about the meaning of the word pushy. So now we're going to talk to our panel about what they've found that's interesting in this radio medium. And I want to begin by asking the same question that I asked to the previous panel. Let's just talk in general. What were the strengths of radio that you found? What were the weaknesses of radio that you found?
I think one of the best things about the radio is that it's very direct. You get to hear exactly what the people are saying, and it's not filtered, it's not through a journalist, and they can use sound bites and clips to let you hear what's going on. But one of the cons of radio would be that you don't really see the candidate and you don't know what they're like. When I first started listening to the debate, I had a hard time figuring out who was talking. And you get to hear their issues and know their ideas really well, and it's not filtered, but you don't really feel like you know the candidate at all.
Interesting. Someone else?
I agree with her, but I also think that one of the bad things about it was that the lack of time. Most of the broadcasts were only 7 minutes or 12 minutes. Didn't really give you an in-depth concept of who the candidates were and what their issues were. Primary summaries of what was going on and just not enough time to really get to know them.
Okay. Anyone else?
Listening to the radio, I thought one of its strengths was that during, especially the debates, you were able to focus mainly on the issues and not more on, personal appearances like you do when you watch television, and that just gave me a chance to really know what each candidate stands for.
So listening to the radio during the debates, you weren't able to see Vice President Gore's sigh?
No,
or any of
and you couldn't even hear it, which
Right.
was kind of, it took away from the whole point of debating, but I think it was a little more important to know what they actually stood for than, what kind of expressions or body language they were using.
But the interesting thing for this project is it's a completely different experience than print or television. We've got a question here, please.
I was just wondering, do you think that the public opinion was addressed, or do you think it was all just political commentators?
I think the public opinion was addressed, and I think that was the core issue, especially coming out with Gore, that people felt that Gore was too pushy. And through most of the discussions through the talk radio and on NPR, they were trying to discuss, was Gore too pushy? Does he need to be this pushy, or was he too lax?
Thank you. Let's talk about talk radio. Tell our audience what were the various types of radio that you listened to, and then specifically let's talk a little bit about if any of you listened to talk radio. What kind of experience was that? Was it useful? Did you get information, or was it just opinion that didn't help you that much in making up your mind?
Well, along with listening to NPR, I got a chance to listen to Rush Limbaugh, who was, it was a very biased approach, but I think it was also helpful, for it gave us a different viewpoint that may not have been just the objective point.
Mm-hmm. And why was it helpful? Just there was information there that you got?
Not so much information, because it seemed not to hit the core points, but it just gave us a different viewpoint of the candidates and how he felt pretty critically of Gore.
Okay, what about the rest of you? Did you mostly listen to National Public Radio, or were there other types of radio that you listened to?
I listened to mostly NPR during the week, but during the weekends, NPR really wasn't available, so I would listen to talk shows, and I was actually in Arizona, and I heard a talk show. A bunch of people were just talking about Bush, and I found that really helpful, actually, because NPR didn't really supply you with analysis of debates and analysis of the issues for each candidate, and that really helped me out to figure out, like, even though Bush has these ideas and they sound good, they're not going to work.
Okay. Now, after this, the project's done, so you no longer have to listen to the radio. But do you still think that you may do that? Is what you've heard made you more interested in using that as a medium for getting your news?
I think it's a definite plus to the mediums. I think that I'm not going to solely listen to NPR, news radio, and other talk shows, but I do think that I will use that later on to help me along with print, online, things like that. Yes, I do.
Okay. How about the rest of you?
Yeah, I think radio is very good for if you want just a brief, concise idea of what's going on. It doesn't always go in depth. They're mostly like short clips, but they also, you get to hear what's going on, and I think it's very informative if used along with other medias.
All right. Well, we thank you for your insights, and with that, we'll go back up to Sissy to hear more about radio.
Bill, no, students did a really good job, and it was exciting to get our first question for this electronic field trip. Please remember to call in and ask those questions. That's what makes this thing really fun and lively. I'm standing back in the exhibit again next to one of my favorite artifacts in this exhibit. It is one of the original microphones used by FDR doing the fireside chats. So we are now here to learn about radio becoming the new power tool for candidates and the press as well. So let's get back with our students and see what kind of research they've done. What can you all tell me about the fireside chats, or FDR?
Well, FDR was a master at using radio. People enjoyed his low style of oratory and his clear enunciation. They felt that FDR was personally speaking to them, not to the 50 million people that he was actually speaking to, but actually his message was being broadcast straight into their homes as they sat in small groups. He was able to bypass the news media and go overhead of all the news media and the journalists to get his message straight into the homes of the people.
That's great.
However, I think there's definitely an unwritten moral code between journalists and the president. In Roosevelt's 1944 re-election campaign, he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Roosevelt's doctor, however, assured U.S. citizens of the president's good health, and although rumors persisted, the press said nothing. So the use of radio enabled politicians to manipulate and at times completely ignore what they didn't want the American people to know. In this case, Roosevelt was able to conceal his ill health to voters who, if they had known the truth, may have voted differently.
Interesting point. I think another interesting point about the radio and how FDR used that radio, you're exactly right. He bypassed the media. The publishers of the large newspapers were very much against FDR and did not want him to win another term. And he strategically figured out, hey, if I use the radio, I can get around the publishers and get right to the people. And that's a real good point. The other thing that was so powerful about that was not only his style of speaking to the public that way, because he did speak to them personally, but he also only went on radio when he had something really important he needed to say. And that's something I think politicians could learn from now. So we all hear about fireside chats, but I bet a lot of people don't realize there were only 30 fireside chats in during all of his administrations. So that was only 3 or 4 chats on the radio a year. And he did it better than anybody, as you've both pointed out very well. Now, for a wrap-up, let's go to Jean again.
Welcome back to the Overlook, and again we'd encourage you to call in our 800 number or to log in and vote for your choice for president on the internet. So we're joined this time by Lee Esterlid from the Indiana Academy, Jennifer Burns from Annandale, and we've heard the students talking about my favorite medium, I have to fess up, radio. And what about the effectiveness of radio? How do you feel about that?
Well, I have to confess that radio is probably my favorite media too, and possibly that's because as a teacher, I have so little time that I get most of my news just driving to work, listening to the radio, getting ready in the morning, listening to the radio. And I think the beauty of radio for me is I love to imagine things, and when you hear someone's voice, you can kind of come up with pictures of your own. And a lot of the students were talking about that in the studio, how they were able to kind of focus more in on the ideas when they weren't distracted by looking at the candidates. Sometimes the visual of the way they're standing or the expressions they make can be sort of distracting to a viewer. They stop listening to what people are saying when they are looking at something specific that they're making with a facial expression.
Okay. Lee, I want to ask you that same question, but first I want to explain that we're on the Overlook here, and what you hear occasionally behind us is the exhibit that we're in every 4 years, and that's some of the audio that's coming across. And it might be a bit of a distraction here, but what about its effectiveness when you're listening in the car or you're at home listening to radio?
Well, I think as adults we may have a different perspective and we may have more experience with radio, but I think for students especially, radio has really lost its effectiveness as a venue, and I think, students talking about the limitedness of campaign ads, especially at a presidential level. Also the fact that NPR is the only significant outlet with analysis. After that, it really falls to talk radio, and after that it's really music stations, and then early morning shock jocks, and they really don't talk news. They may lampoon the presidential candidate, but they really don't talk about him, and I think that's because of that it's lost some of its effectiveness.
Let's pick up on an important word you just used, talk. Talk radio is a bit different than what we talk about in terms of news reports. Right. What about talk radio? How effective, how good is that?
I think in a way talk radio, especially we think about Rush Limbaugh or Mario Cuomo used to have a program, and that there's an open bias, and in a way that's very much like 18th and 19th century journalism, print media, is that there was a very much of an open bias and very much playing to a specific party or campaign. And so I don't think it's ineffective. In a way, I think it kind of says, you can listen to these 3 hours of programming and you know what you're going to hear. And for that reason, maybe it's more effective, and I know Rush Limbaugh in particular tends to garner a very large audience. So maybe in the long run, it's really not so much a break with the past, but a return to the past, just in a different format.
Jennifer, how do you feel?
I mean, I agree that talk radio can be a very positive format, and primarily because it gives people a place to express their views. And I think since free speech is sort of the foundation of our democracy, if you have a place where you can go and talk about what you're thinking, it's very healthy to get those ideas out there. And if you have a very effective talk radio host who's there to sort of challenge your views and question them and to make a caller articulate exactly why they think something, sort of like a good teacher would do, that can be a very healthy thing for our democracy in general.
Very good. Well, we're going to be talking about radio with pictures in a few minutes. We'll be going back to Bill in the studio. I don't know if we have any questions from there yet, but again, we'd like to remind you, call in on our 800 number or log in and vote for president on the internet. Bill, back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Gene. And we also want to remind our audience that we're glad to take your questions. We've got a whole group of extremely well-informed students here who would love to talk to you and answer any questions that you have. We are now going to move on to, as Gene said, radio with pictures, which is the medium of television. And we've got a clip to show you of the first debate between Texas Governor George Bush and Vice President Gore. We're going to look at that and talk about it a little bit, and then we'll show you another clip. So let's look at that first clip from the first debate.
Jim, can I... minutes is up, but we'll finish that. Can I make one other point? Wait a minute. They get $25,000 a year income. That makes them ineligible.
Look. This is a man, he's got great numbers. He talks about numbers. I'm beginning to think not only did he invent the internet, but he invented the calculator. It's fuzzy math. It's trying to scare people in the voting booth. Under my tax plan that he continues to criticize, I set a third. No, the federal government should take no more than a third.
Okay, that was a lot more imagery and name-calling than facts and information. That's a standard rap against television. Is that what you found in studying this for the last 3 weeks?
I think that footage was a good representation of how imagistic television media can be. If you look at all three debates, Al Gore was rather rude and negatively aggressive in the first debate, and public perception was that George Bush won that debate. In the second debate, both candidates were rather passive and agreed with each other, and people thought that debate was a tie. And the third debate, Al Gore was more assertive and positively aggressive, and public perception was that Al Gore won that debate. And so it's a good indication of how imagistic television media can be.
Yeah, and it also shows how journalism, especially television journalism, latches on to certain ideas in the debate, such as the interrupting and certain catchphrases. The journalism just latches onto it, makes it the focus of everything, as opposed to the ideas.
And we see the power of those images because that's still what we're talking about all those debates, moreover, rather than the positions that either of these candidates took. Well, let's look at another clip. This is from the second debate, a slightly different format. You'll see the two candidates seated around a table, and talking not too nicely to each other again. Let's look at that.
Large that would put us into such big deficits that gives almost half the benefits to the wealthiest of the wealthy, I think anybody would have a hard time explaining that clearly in a way that makes sense to the average person.
That's the kind of exaggeration I was just talking about.
Well, I wasn't the one having trouble explaining it.
Gentlemen, it's time to go to the close.
Okay. Using that as a basis, let's talk generally, as we have with the other groups, about the general strengths, the general weaknesses of television. What do you think?
Well, I would say one characteristic about television media is that it is very imagistic and relies very heavily on the charisma and personality of the candidates.
And while that's a pro, it's also a con because it takes away from the issues. I think that's the biggest problem with television journalism is it's not reality. We need to focus on a candidate's positions on issues, whereas television is so obsessed with image.
I noticed while I was watching the debates, I felt that I was so busy watching, their facial gestures and, what they were doing with their hands and their body positions and the way they were looking at each other, that I found it almost difficult to focus on the issues because I was so busy watching what they were doing and how they were interacting with each other and with the audience.
Let's talk about the issue of time. Those were fairly brief clips that we just watched, probably not that much shorter or longer than the average story that you would see on the nightly news. Was that a problem for you? Were you able to get enough in-depth coverage on television to really make an informed decision in this campaign?
Well, television coverage is very subjective. The television media is always looking for the latest breaking story and the most relevant news. And so if something, for instance, explosive occurs in the Middle East on one day, that could monopolize an entire newscast. And so sometimes you wouldn't even get any election coverage.
I felt watching television that sometimes, especially when watching like the nightly news or something, that it was very compact. And I wasn't really given the entire story, so I didn't really understand the issues where they felt on things.
Okay. We generally, in my generation, we generally think, when we think of television, we think of the nightly news broadcast, which used to dominate the media scene. That's not the case at all anymore. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other types of television you watched, whether it's local news, whether it's all news cable channels, or whether it's long-form programs on PBS, or some of these call-in shows in which there's a lot of opinion that's voiced on television. Just comment on any of those that you would like, whether you think they were good or bad or indifferent.
I watched a lot of CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, and Fox Channel News, and I found they gave pretty good coverage on the campaigns. They were generally an hour long or half an hour long, and they had a lot of different opinions, and they always invited, political analysts that gave both perspectives on the candidates. And I thought it provided pretty good coverage, and I didn't see that many biases.
Okay.
A lot of times, the cable shows, which had a very specific focus and more in-depth coverage, offered a more subjective view of the issues and kind of a rawer version of the issues.
How about local news?
I have watched a lot of local news striving to find where they place the importance of daily life with the campaign, and I found certain days where it was just ignored completely. You wouldn't even know that there was an election going on with local news. I watched noon news, and it seemed like certain issues that weren't even important would be given focus.
Okay. Do we have a question here in the studio audience? All right. Oh, we do. Terrific.
How often do you feel like the image distracted you from getting the issues?
I found it most prevalent in the debates because it was the candidates speaking themselves, and I was so immersed into seeing what kind of person they were and their personality that I had a hard time focusing on their viewpoints, on where they stand, and it was difficult to determine what they believe in and what they were planning on doing once they entered office.
Yeah, I think that's the problem because I heard a statistic that 2/3 of all Americans get most of their news or all of their news from television. And this places an emphasis on images as opposed to the actual issues of the campaign.
I think the debates were a perfect prism for this study that you all have done, because as we've seen with the other panels, you get a completely different experience depending on how you view it, and television in particular. Eric from Muncie, I understand you've got a question? Aaron, I'm sorry. Aaron, are you there? Okay. Well, I think we'll go back up to Sissy to talk more about television. We want to thank our panel again, and we'll hear some more. All right, we do have Aaron. Aaron, what's your question?
We're not getting it. We're not getting it.
All right, well, hopefully we've answered Aaron's questions with the erudite comments you've heard from our panel here. So I think we will go up to Sissy now to hear more about television and the studies that we've done.
Well, I hope Aaron will be able to get back to us later with a question. And that's just a reminder to all of you, too. Please make this a real exciting field trip and get your questions called in or emailed in to us. Now, welcome to where it all began. You've heard them talk about television. Well, this is the beginning of television land right here in the exhibit. The exhibit behind me is all about the first checker speech and also the first televised debate between Kennedy and Nixon. So we've got some real exciting stuff to tell you about right here, and all the rules change and new battle lines are drawn. So take it away.
That was something we noticed, was that in the 1950s there was a huge change from radio into television. Like by the end of the 1950s, nearly 90% of Americans had a television in their own homes. So there was a huge change between radio into the television, and politicians had to adjust to that.
Yes. The power of television was made evident in 1952 when vice presidential candidate Richard Nixon was accused of using money improperly. He countered this accusation by delivering the checker speech on national television. Nixon effectively used the medium of television, appealing to the public as shown here.
One other thing I probably should tell you, because if I don't, they'll probably be saying this about me too. We did get something, a gift, after the election. A man down in Texas heard Pat on the radio mention the fact that our two youngsters would like to have a dog. And believe it or not, the day before we left on this campaign trip, we got a message from the Union Station in Baltimore saying they had a package for us. We went down to get it. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog in a crate that he'd sent all the way from Texas. Black and white, spotted. And our little girl, Tricia, the 6-year-old, named it Checkers. And you know, the kids, like all kids, love the dog. And I just want to say this right now, that regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep him.
All right, we've got Aaron back with us. So, Aaron, go ahead with your question.
I was just wondering why young people aren't interested in the campaign this year.
Ah, good question. You know what? I'm going to let these young people right here give some thoughts on that.
What was that?
And the question is, that'd be good if I repeated it for you, wouldn't it? The question that Aaron has is he wonders why young people aren't more interested in the election this year.
Well, something we found was until we had this research project, we weren't really as in touch with what was going on, whereas Bill Clinton perhaps went on to MTV and got a hold of the audience. They really haven't come to us that often.
Yeah. Any ideas from you on why they might not be as interested?
Just in general, I think children have lost the aspect due to the continuing, just media has focused more on movies and entertainment rather than on important issues.
Okay. All right, well, let's thank you, Aaron, for that question, and that's a warning to you all out there. Please call in again and ask some more questions for us. If I can't answer them, these guys can, and we have a good team of other experts here to answer your questions. Let's go back to what we were going to talk about with the debates on television.
Well, in 1960, they had their first televised debate, and this was between current Vice President at the time, Richard Nixon, and John F. Kennedy. Richard Nixon had been ill at the time. He looked sickly. He wasn't as well prepared. Well, he knew the issues, but he didn't look as well on TV. John F. Kennedy was tanned and relaxed, and though he didn't maybe perhaps know as much, he did look better on TV. And this proved to America afterwards when they polled people that the radio listeners felt Nixon had won, though the TV watchers felt that Nixon had lost. And so this proved to Americans and to the politicians that TV was very powerful.
That's right. Any other comments? Do you have any other comments on the checker speech or the thing? You all right? Okay. I think one other really interesting thing about the televised debate between Kennedy and Nixon is the fact that Kennedy was a very little-known senator at that time and really did not have a large public following. We think of him now as this hugely popular president, but it was really interesting that the power of television could launch somebody's career that way. And other candidates followed in suit right away and followed up on that. All right, Gene, back to you for a wrap-up on TV.
Thank you, Sissy. Joined by Ken Stewart from the Indiana Academy, and Jennifer Burns, who stayed with us here from Annandale High. Let's talk for a moment. We talked a little bit about radio and how effective it was. How effective is television? And I guess we'll go to Ken first.
Television, I think, has brought people into their homes and has given them the image, the picture, the sound, the voice, the nuances of the body language and so forth. I believe that has probably changed the way people now perceive as opposed to looking at adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and so forth in print.
Jennifer?
Everyone keeps talking about the imagery that's distracting, the imagery that keeps them from focusing in on the issues. And it's one of these things which politicians, some of them love, some of them hate. If you're good looking, you're thanking God for TV. If you've had a rough day at the office, you're thinking, if only I could do this on the radio. I mean, it does distract us, and part of that's, I think, our natural human reaction to images. And I mean, the most wonderful part of this project for me has been students who were not allowed to watch TV. I loved seeing reactions of students who were raised on TV. They were so used to always getting everything they ever think about from TV and actually getting away from it. And I would often try and describe, when we talk about the debates and such in class, they'd often feel like they missed something by not watching it. And it's just it's such a powerful medium and effective, yes.
Well, let's pick up on that just for a second. We had in radio, talk radio versus news reports. In television, we've had news reports and the debates. How effective were the debates? What did you think students found out about the debates?
The students seem to focus a lot of attention on the debates themselves. There seemed to be a lot more time they could concentrate on the particular debate. They could work on the particular issues that were presented. On the news clips themselves, 15 to 20 seconds worth of news clips, all of a sudden the issues might not get as covered as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them got bored by some of the debates, but I think it was that third debate that captured them the most, and part of that was the fact that I think the candidates were able to step out from behind the podium, and the people that saw TV loved watching the body language, loved watching Al Gore stand really close to George Bush and sort of intimidate him just with his presence, something that the students listening to the radio or just reading about it didn't get to experience. And I mean, it's that kind of imagery, the body language, the expressions, the look of disgust George Bush threw at Al Gore for standing so close, that kind of makes politics a little more exciting, I think, more of a show, and that's partly why we love TV.
Did we find any students who found it distracting in terms of, as opposed to the substance of the debate itself, the focus on the hand gestures, the smiles, the gasp, the sigh?
It seems the number of students that we had just listening to the studio, Stephanie and Laura and Ashley, that they commented that they felt like there wasn't as much substance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the students illustrate very well how easily all human beings are distracted by the color of someone's shirt or, the glow of sweat upon their brow. I mean, we start to associate that with everything else we know about those particular types of colors or gestures, and it can be very distracting. So the message, don't get all of your political news from TV if you want to be able to really focus in on all aspects of the campaign.
Okay, well, we're here at the Overlook, and occasionally you can hear behind us the exhibit every 4 years. We started on the front porch with very, basic kinds of coverage in print. We worked our way through the electronic media, and I think we're going to go back to Bill Nichols now in the studio. We do have we have a phone call from Nathan. We'd like to take that, please.
Yeah, my name is Nathan Perry. I'm calling from Annandale, and I'd like to know about the internet. I know the media is really centered around TV right now for the election. If one day maybe it can be moved to like the internet, and if they could regulate the content on the internet, if that would ever happen. And I was wondering what the people on the panel would have to say about that.
Okay, well, the question from Nathan was about the internet and whether it can be employed in the election, Nathan, if I'm saying your question correctly, and also the potential for regulation of that. Wondering if we have any thoughts. We are going to look at the internet in the next segment, We may want to defer that question, Nathan, but we'll keep that in mind, and I think we're going to go to another caller from Brian. From Ryan, excuse me.
Hey, one of the big issues for this campaign is the conservation of energy. What do the candidates have in mind for this?
Okay, well, we're going to have to, I think, turn to our students perhaps for this one. The question was conservation of energy being a large part of the election issues this year. And I wonder if we have anybody available who could talk to us about the two candidates' positions on those particular subjects. Certainly, Bill, in the studio.
Yeah, thank you, Gene. Is we got anyone who's paid attention to conservation issues or the environmental policies of the candidates in particular, either up here or in our studio audience here?
I heard a lot about Gore was always talking about how he wanted to develop new technologies, while Bush was more interested in finding new sources of energy, like looking for oil up in the Alaskan Reserve, while Gore wanted to look for solar energy and electric cars and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think the oil prices being what they are, that's been a fairly major topic of discussion in this campaign, which you all probably found in your wanderings around the internet, which we'll talk about it in just a minute. I think before we go to we've got a phone call from Twyla. Twyla, what's your question?
Hello?
Yeah, we're here.
I was wondering how come we never see too much coverage on third-party candidates?
Thank you for that question, Twyla. It's why don't we see more coverage on third-party candidates, which I've found in talking to all the students is something that has occurred to all of you. So you guys talk about that, or again, please come down to the microphone and talk about it from our studio audience.
Actually, that's the thing I found about the internet is that out of all the other mediums, the internet provided more information on third-party candidates than the other ones did, because there's more opportunity for third-party candidates to put up a website or put anything else that they want on the web, whereas they can't necessarily get news time on the television or in the newspaper.
Okay. Please, someone from our studio audience.
As I was covering print media, I felt very disheartened that there was no coverage of third parties, and I read very few articles. And I think that's something that the print media in general should address more, and I just think that it needed to be covered more.
Thank you. As someone who's in the print media, just a brief defense. At USA Today, we do what I think is a significant amount on third parties, but to our caller, that's what the internet is for. If there's information that you want to find out, it's chock full of websites, be it for Ralph Nader or the Libertarian candidate or Pat Buchanan. So, you know, check it out for yourself. That's what it's there for. We have someone else who's got a comment.
I would say the coverage of third-party candidates is very dependent on money. To appear on television, you have to have 15% of the vote to be on the debate. You have to have money to run ads, and a lot of third-party candidates don't have that kind of capital to advertise for their election. And with the emergence of the internet as a major journalistic force, we could see that change and see more representation of third-party candidates.
Okay, thank you very much. I think now we're going to look at some examples of that emerging journalistic force, which is the internet, something that journalism professionals like myself spend a lot of time thinking about and looking at and trying to figure out. There's CNN.com, which is one of the websites that our students looked at, but MSNBC. It's something that we in the journalism community spend an awful lot of time thinking about how to use, how to connect it to existing publications. There's the LA Times, which has a very complete and interesting website. CNN, it's politics.com. And now we're back here with our panel. We're going to talk to them about what they found on the internet. Let's talk in general. What were the strengths that you found of the news gathering operations that you found on the internet? What were some of the weaknesses?
The most important thing I found was the fact that the internet gave the user access to a very large group of people. Like, let's say for probably in the newspapers or in TV, people, minority groups such as homosexuals or maybe Native Americans, they didn't get such a big coverage. But on the internet, such small groups like human rights, environmentalists, they could post their website and let people know what they really think. In that way, we're getting a larger group of people together. And in this way, it really
Okay.
helps the democratic process because a larger group of people are being heard.
Okay, thank you very much. We're unfortunately running out of time, so we're going to go back to Sissy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That's an exciting report on the internet. You've seen today how the media and the candidates have both found ways to manipulate and use these different kinds of tools to get the message out. We have two students here with us today also with some information on the research that they've done with the internet. So take it away.
I think it's important to remember that the internet has a lot of opinions and biases that you need to wade through. And when you're looking at internet sites, you need to think about the credibility of the sources. Like a nonprofit, nonpartisan site like votesmart.org would probably be a really good site for comparing the candidates. And other personal sites like a pro-Bush site will have lots of opinions and may not give you the information you need. And the official Al Gore site will probably give you information, but it won't necessarily be slanted towards the candidate. And it's good to look at news, print, and radio sources for your information, but the internet is good for in-depth research and interactive research.
Today, basically anybody can put up whatever they want to on the internet. There are no real set rules and regulations that one must adhere to. And this also applies to campaigning. Candidates can post up official websites, candidates can post up unofficial websites, and opponents can put up mockery websites. And it will be interesting to see what kind of guidelines will be set in the next 10 to 20 years. And I'm sure there'll be some court cases that will lay down some precedent for future use of the internet.
Which is the perfect place for us to tie up our show today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank all these students. They've done terrific research. They've used our exhibit and the museum resources here to pull this whole thing together. And thanks so much to Ball State University and Best Buy for making all this possible. Hope you enjoyed the show and hope you'll come back and join us again sometime and visit the museum. Thank you very much.